I'm Bill Whitacre, and this is the Along the Way podcast, and I'm glad to share it with everybody today. So today we're going to be talking about my travels around the world on a motorcycle.
So, Bill, through your travels, you've seen a lot of different cultures. What is something that you've seen consistently throughout all cultures?
You know, it's interesting as you travel the world, and it's almost like the more remote you get, the more you recognize how consistent cultures are and how consistent the human behavior is. I keep coming up with the same three things: faith, hope, and compassion. Sometimes I use faith, hope, and charity, but actually what happens is, it's without a doubt, that you will run across faith, hope, and compassion in every single society. Now, I'm not saying that 99% of a culture or a region of the world has those three characteristics, but I will say everybody has a certain level of faith. That may not be our faith. It may not be a consistent faith. It may not be faith in a God, or it might be their God. The point is they have some level of faith, and it comes out all the time. Hope, without exception. Listen, I think the humanity survives on hope, and it represents itself in every single country and every single region. And of course, compassion and charity are very, very common. It has to be common, or how would society even thrive or survive in any way? And I think that's the commonality that I see: faith, hope, and compassion.
When you're traveling, what stories do you have to share for, I don't know, that you've seen consistently with those three things? Like, do you have any stories that you can relate with those three things?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting. I can talk about stories of shaman rituals, and that there's a certain faith that happens with shaman ritual. In fact, if you think about a shaman ritual in Mongolia, it's really about faith, hope, and compassion. When you put it all together and you learn just enough about it, and then when they get to let you stand around the bonfire with them drinking some kind of grain alcohol, you can pretty well understand that this is a faith, hope, and compassion type of ritual and activity that happens in Mongolia, as an example. But I find faith very, very common. Faith is something that I think everybody needs a level of. I'm not saying that everybody has to have the same faith that I do. I'm not saying that everybody has to be indoctrinated into a religion. I'm saying that there's a certain amount of faith that is developed around the world. And frequently it's in a God of their choice. Frequently it's in a more organized religious situation. And it's not uncommon to find faith, and I ask about faith. That's one of the things that I'm really curious about. It's not uncommon to find that that these individuals will have their own faith, and almost like a faith in, I think about the indigenous Indians, the Native Americans in the United States, and what their faith was and how they pursued their faith was uniquely different than the Spaniards when the Spaniards first came to the United States.
Could you share that story a little bit, and like your experience with the bonfire, the Shaman Bonfire? Because I know that was an awesome story.
Well, there was a small group of us, and we went over to ride in Mongolia, and actually it was with the GS Trophy. It was the BMW GS Trophy. And it was at the end of the GS Trophy, and we had an opportunity to go ride the new motorcycles of BMW, and our small group of friends, we decided to go to Mongolia and experience Mongolia that way because the motorcycles were available. the very first night we were there, we were staying in a yurt camp, and down the way there was a big bonfire, and a couple of the guys went down to check out the big bonfire. We'll come to find out it was shamans, and it was a shaman convention. And so they kind of came back, and I went back with them, and I'll never forget standing around this huge monster bonfire. I mean, I felt like it was Burning Man or something, but standing around this bonfire, and we were we had this like green alcohol, and I just kind of pretended I drank it. It's so bad, it's unbelievable. But and then you'd throw it into the fire and kind of prove that that you drank most of it or all of it, and it was a remarkable experience. And it's, you have these kind of indelible images in your mind when you travel like this. And that truly was one of the indelible images. And it was it's just fantastic to get to experience, and how welcoming the shamans, the other shamans were for us to stand around, and they're around the bonfire throwing excess. You kind of had to prove that the glass was empty. Yeah. Mine wasn't.
How'd you prove it?
Yeah,
you
mine.
Did prove it?
I threw it in the fire, and the fire exploded.
Okay. So were you doing the Silk Road then, or was that a separate?
Yeah, no, that was a different one. That was strictly a Mongolia trip, and an opportunity to go experience Mongolia. And
you stayed in yurts too, right? If I
yeah,
from the photos.
well, frequently.
Okay.
Not every time, but frequently we did, and it was just a super experience. It was hot. It was dry. We rode the Gobi Desert. Yeah. We all ended up with some level of intestinal problems. I remember thinking, boy, I dodged the bullet. I didn't get the intestinal problems that everybody else did. And then we get out into 100-degree weather in this sand that really wasn't even hardly a road. You're just right in sand. There's no trees. I have one photo of me standing under what's considered the only tree in the Gobi Desert. And it felt so good. But I remember getting so sick. And I mean, like, I could not keep anything down. And then it was hot, and I'd stop and I'd lay underneath the motorcycle, because that's the only place that I could get any shade. And I was miserable the entire day. And then all of a sudden I came out of it and wanted to eat everything in sight. So, but Mongolia is a special place. I need to get back to Mongolia.
Yeah. When you were traveling all across both continents and everything, what was the difference that you saw between like third world or what is the term?
Developed and developing.
Develop and developing. Because we're all, like, at this point, it's all developing. What was the difference that you saw in the people and the cultures and the personalities and stuff?
I think developing is. Yeah, I would much rather travel in developing countries. I'm intrigued by the way they manage their lives, the way they manage their kind of families, their, for lack of a better term, clans, and how that comes together and what that looks like. I'm also intrigued to find how much they value each other and how much they look out after each other. I don't know if I see that so much in some of the more developed countries. I mean, after traveling in Europe this summer, and I've traveled in Europe, I guess 3 years in a row now, to some degree, and I probably traveled through 20 or 25 countries in Europe. The point is, it's a whole different situation. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just it's just not as meaningful to me to travel in developed countries. Even though there's a lot of history, there's a lot of circumstances that I want to experience in developed countries. I don't find that I'm as interested in the developed countries' cultures as I am into the developing countries. And even in Mongolia, it is a developed country, but not the entire country. I mean, so you kind of have the developed country like in Ulaanbaatar, which is a very cosmopolitan city. But then you have much of the rest of the country that's absolutely incredible. And I love it. I mean, Azerbaijan's the same way. When you think about Baku being one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and then you have the rest of the country that's pretty much in a developing state, and you find this frequently.
What's that dynamic like between the people in a similar country who are developed and developing? Do they view each other differently, or all as one country?
No, I think they view each other, and kind of all one country. There's a significant amount of pride in countries, and it doesn't. You can go to a country with a lot of poverty and a lot of subsistence activity. An example might be in Africa, and you just feel like is there a point that some of the local people, some of the more third world or developing type areas, you feel like that they're in a position where they could resent their life situation. They are not.
Wow.
I'm sure there are, but for the most part, they are not resentful of their country, of their circumstances, and they actually pursue a certain amount of joy and happiness with what they have, and they appreciate what they have beyond what most people do, maybe even in the United States, as an example.
I think that's a really good segue to talking about the hope that you've seen.
I have a little bit of story about the term hope, and we're in Colombia, and we are. This has been about 8 years ago, and we actually had soccer balls to give out to children as we were traveling. They were flattened. We had to blow them up, and I think that we had maybe 100 of them to take through.
Wow.
To take through the Andes. We stopped one place, and there was a dirt soccer field, and there was even a soccer coach, and there were kids out with on the soccer field. But there was this little girl, and I kept asking her name, and she knew just a little bit English. I mean, it's pretty amazing to me how these smaller kids in primary school know English. But I kept asking her name. I did not understand it. And finally I said, you know what? I want to call you Hope. And that's what I want your name to be for me. And she didn't understand, of course, but she was absolutely, I cherished that time with her, because for the next hour or two, she was right at my side. And then her mother came over, and I got to meet her mother, and her mother didn't know English, but it's kind of like there's a certain amount of spirit and hope that all these people have that you meet, no matter where you are in the world.
Right.
I don't think you survive very quickly without some level of hope. And I think almost the tougher things get, and if you're living in a dirt floor hut, but you're wearing clean clothes, and that's pretty much what I experienced. I think hope is a big part of it, and I think that I think hope's manifested through lots of activities, but more than anything, they take care of each other, and I think that actually breeds that hope really well.
You mentioned something about how basically you said, lack of a better term, clan. What's the difference between like a family you've experienced and like a clan? Is it that how tight knit they are? Is it bigger community, or what is it exactly?
I think so. Nation. I think clan's pretty interesting because I keep looking for the right word, but clan to me is almost it's not necessarily tribal. To me is they follow no matter what.
Right.
Tribal is something that you're almost dedicated to. The clan, when I use the word clan, I want to say it feels more like a collective, like a commune.
Oh, okay.
That people take care of themselves. They look out after themselves. I remember we were in Uzbekistan, and I'll never forget Helge Peterson having photographs of people that he took when he was on this similar trip many years prior, and he printed out all these photographs of these people, and we pulled into this little village, and he was showing people photographs from many. I want to say it was 6 or 8 years before, previous to when we were there, and he was showing these pictures, and the pictures. The people were giggling, the locals were giggling, and they were laughing, and then they'd point over here and point over there, and and they knew exactly who it was, and then we tried to get through some level of communication, tried to get them to bring that individual so Helge could give them the photo, and what a wonderful experience to see people's face light up. To have a professional, very professional photo taken of them, many years earlier. And then here's this, Helge's Norwegian, but here's this Norwegian that handing out these photos. And it's so rewarding to experience those type of situations.
What about China? What hope did you see in China when you met?
It's interesting because the entrance to China left me pretty negative feelings, and so we come in from Kyrgyzstan, and as we enter China in a very remote area, and it was extremely remote, and it took a few days, but one I'll never forget that everything changed, the attitudes, the spirit. Now we're talking about the Uyghur Muslim area of Western China, and it was the hotbed. It was in 2019, and it was literally the hotbed of the Uyghur persecution and collecting Uyghur Muslims. And putting them in re-education centers. Now, at this exact time that we were there, the New York Times came out with a complete expose on what was going on over there. So it really fueled the fire and made, but everybody, the Uyghur people were very, very somewhat distant. They tended to be happy with each other. They were a little cautious, I think, with Americans or foreigners, I should say. But I think as you moved, further east, and everything tended to loosen up. But at first, very regulation based, cameras every place. You knew. We got stopped frequently, not a few times, but a lot of times. They asked the same questions for documents and where are you going, why are you going, what's going on.
They actually sent people to watch you, correct?
Yeah, right. So we actually had to have a guide, and he was a Uyghur, and but he was a member of the Communist Party, and he wouldn't answer hardly any of the hard questions that I had for him or anybody else had for him. But he was really quite enjoyable, and but he'd get really frustrated if we would get out of line or or disappear or whatever. And every once in a while, there was no way that I was going to, and a couple of us maybe was going to ride right in a line. so that he could watch us from a van at the end. So maybe me, maybe others, we kind of got out on the side roads, but he was really a pleasant person, and but you could tell that anything that had to do with the Communist Party, that very disciplined, very concerned about what he might say that would be wrong. And then I think he was also very concerned about what happens on these cameras, because there were cameras everywhere.
Wow.
I mean, you could just, every place you went, whether it was a gas station, a restaurant, any kind of a village or city, there would be cameras.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Going into China, it was pretty interesting, because that's where, when we went through the border and the customs and border crossing issues, they wanted all of our telephones, and we had I think there was 8 of us. There was 8 of us, and anyway, they wanted our telephones, and I remember I was kind of hanging in the back, and I thought, I am not going to give up my phone. And they wanted passcodes, and then they'd go through the phones, and we're pretty convinced that they were putting some kind of an app or a tracking app or whatever on our phones. I kept saying, and then when they finally got to me, I said, I'm not going to do this, but I had a little bit of a visa problem, because my visa was a work visa, a 10-year work visa, because we built a French fry factory in Beijing, and I would, periodically go back and forth. But they didn't understand why I was on a work visa instead of a tourist visa, and then I wasn't going to give them my phone.
Yeah.
And so they took me into a different room. And it was pretty interesting. At first, it was kind of grilling me, and the boss came because he could speak English, and he was like the commandant or something. I don't know what they call a Chinese, higher ranked individual. But the point is, he kept asking me, and he wanted to know about my work. Why was I on a work visa? And I said, well, a visa's a visa to me, and I just didn't know any better, I guess. And but he wanted to know what my work was, and I told him, I said, we make French fries for McDonald's. The next thing I know, I was his best friend. And boy, it was funny. He was laughing, and he loved McDonald's, and I only wish I had some coupons to give him. But the point is, next thing I know, he wants a picture taken with me, and he never took my phone. So I think out of the 8 of us that was traveling together, I think I was the only one that didn't have to give up my phone. And I remind those guys all the time that I did not give up my phone. You guys did.
Yeah.
So